Can you unmute? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we are all set. This weekend, we are going to devote to understanding Krishnamurti's vision of dialogue as a religious inquiry. There are Socratic dialogues, there are Upanishadic dialogues, there are diplomatic dialogues, but Krishnamurti gave to the word dialogue a completely different significance and suggested that we can use that for joint religious inquiry. Normally, when we say you have to be a light unto yourself, it means each individual has to do his inquiry by himself, by observing his own consciousness in daily life with a learning mind. So Krishnaji was asked, is there nothing that we can do together? And he said, sure, we can do it together, provided you can set aside your beliefs, your knowledge, your opinions, and so on, and look at the question afresh. Take a question and have a dialogue around it by approaching it afresh and by watching your own responses, not from your intellect, not from your readings and so on. The intellect only has a role of finding the words to communicate, but it can't take you to the truth. So one has to posit the truth as the unknown. And if all of us are approaching the truth not through the known, but we are aware that the truth is the unknown, and the known is sitting in our memory, and that is not necessarily the truth, then you are exploring. And in this exploration, because each person is setting aside his background, his point of view, his knowledge, his opinions, and so on. So it is very different from a debate or a discussion, or even an exchange of points of view. In those, one is already having an opinion, one is committed to a particular point of view, and one is arguing in favor of that point of view. And the other person is doing the same, and that divides us. So our knowledge, our opinions, our conditioning divides us if we are attached to it. But if you hold it lightly, if you doubt your own opinions as you doubt all opinions, then you are relatively free of all opinion. and you are watching not through a particular point of view, but holistically. More easily said than done, because we have all been trained into debates and arguments and defense of a point of view and so on. So this is something completely different. It's a religious inquiry. And religious inquiry begins from not knowing. Because if you already know, what are you searching? You are merely trying to convince the other person of what you know. And what you know depends on your conditioning. We have seen that. So it's not the truth. And it becomes a competition between various points of view or different opinions and so on. So in a dialogue, in an ideal dialogue, as envisaged by Krishnamurti, there is no division. He said our knowledge divides us. But truth does not divide. The truth is the same for all of us. So if you concentrate on discovering the truth, then you are together. But if you concentrate on approaching it from your own opinion, your own point of view, then your inquiry is already colored. And that's not then a dialogue. People have argued whether in a dialogue one should sit in a circle or in a square, whether there should be a coordinator disciplining people, or it should be an open dialogue, no authority, no coordinator, and so on. You can set your own rules for the dialogue. It's like playing a game. You have to set the rules for the game. But those are not the important things. The important thing is that your mind itself must be in a state of dialogue. If the mind is not in a state of dialogue, that means not free from the known and inquiring beyond the known, then there will be no dialogue. So ultimately, as Krishna says, we are the world. In the same way, we are the dialogue. That means if our minds are not in a mode of dialogue, there will be no dialogue. There will be only discussion and argument and point of view, and then all herds and opinions and all those. We are familiar with all that. So it's a difficult endeavor because he is asking us to set aside our knowledge for that 1 hour during which we are having this dialogue and listen to each other. That listening has to be free from the past. You listen in the immediate present and you respond in the immediate present through observation. Now, when you do it like that, it doesn't matter whether there are 2 people in the dialogue or 20 people or even 1. So Krishnaji also conducted dialogues with himself. That means when you have not taken sides with any opinion, you can yourself look at all the viewpoints and all the opinions and go beyond them, consider them and go beyond them by having a dialogue with oneself. So I want to illustrate that because it's an important way of doing religious inquiry in our own personal life. Suppose I want to understand how conflict arises in life. Now, life is relationship. Relationship to people, relationship to ideas, to books, to property, to nature, to the fellow man, all relationships, to yourself. So one must understand how do you approach this without knowledge. That means without the past, approach it afresh, to look at it. So I'm going to take this as an example for illustrating how one can understand the origin of conflict in one's life. Is there conflict in our relationship with nature? When you observe, you will find that there is very little conflict with nature because there is no ego in nature. There is ego only in your consciousness. So it's relatively easy. Even if a storm comes or you fall ill, which is a natural occurrence, you don't get angry, you don't blame nature, because you know that there is no such motive in nature. It has just happened. It's an accident that it happened to you. And that makes it much easier to live through it. Of course, it can prevent you from going to the office if it rains very much or blocks you or you fall ill and so on. And so there may be a certain amount of disappointment coming from that because you may be keen to go to your office. But if you have understood that I don't have a strong desire for things to happen in a particular way, then it won't happen. Then you will go through it without any conflict. So one sees that it is one's own approach that creates conflict when nature obstructs you. Is there conflict in our relationship with property? Yes. If you are very attached to your property, all the time thinking about how to maximize it, and you give tremendous importance to having property, then when the share market goes down, your heart goes down with it. You are depressed. And when it goes up, you are elated because what you are attached to becomes part of you. Again, it is something that comes from our own approach. If you are not attached, if you are not dependent, then there is no conflict. It's just a happening. And you can face it, take necessary steps to face it. Is there conflict in my relationship with fellow human beings? Yes. When my wife does something which I don't like, I feel a dislike for her. I scold her. I tell her, but she doesn't agree. She feels no, that is important, and she continues to do it. Then it creates conflict, it creates division. Let's examine that a little bit. Why should she agree with me? Why should my opinion dominate? After all, we are living together in the same home. She has the same right to take decisions as I have. But somewhere in the conditioning, there is this domination of the husband over the wife, which makes me feel that she should obey me. If I don't look upon it that way, in a hierarchical way, if I treat her as a friend, she's just a friend with a difference of opinion. And it need not create either like or dislike. She has a right to that opinion. And if I am equally concerned for her to be happy, then I don't mind that she does it that way, because that's what makes her happy. So again, when there is an assertion that it has to be my way, not her way, that creates a division. So you can see how the ego is entering into the relationship in a subtle way and creating the division. If we don't approach it like that, there is no division. Is there conflict in my relationship with ideas and ideologies? Yes, I like the concept of democracy. I don't like communism or dictatorship. That's an opinion, and that opinion makes me react in certain ways. But if I understand that there are deep-rooted causes why the world is the way it is, that there is a whole history behind all this, and the other man has grown up with communist ideas for the same reason you have grown up with democratic ideas. And therefore, he is siding with communism and you are siding with democracy. So you can understand how the conflict arises from attachment to ideology. We have already seen that earlier when we saw how ideas can create division. Is there conflict in my relationship with myself? Yes, there are certain traits in myself which I don't like. And there are certain other traits in myself which I extol, which I am proud of. Where does that judgment come from? It comes from my own conditioning. If I don't use the conditioning, I can look at it impartially, then there is no like or dislike. There is only a difference. Differences don't create division. But when differences are evaluated and looked down upon, then that looking down upon a difference creates the hatred. The Muslim goes to the mosque and prays the way he has been taught to pray to God. And you go to the church or the temple and pray the way you have been taught. And if you don't judge, it's just a difference. Innocent difference, like the color of my shirt may be different from the color of your shirt, or my height may be different from yours. My knowledge is different from yours. So differences are normal things. No two things are completely alike in nature. How does a difference turn into a division? That's a psychological process in which the mind measures, then condemns, and from that condemnation, the like and dislike arises. So one can see this whole process and learn about it. And you have to live with this thought. Is it possible to hold a difference only as a difference and not convert it into a division? Then you have to stay with it till you can resolve that issue. It's not just an intellectual inquiry, it's an existential inquiry. If you want to free yourself of this division, this conflict, then you have to free yourself of that like and dislike, which produces division. Differences, as we said, don't produce division. We are all different from each other. My age is different, my knowledge is different, my money is different from yours, and so on. That doesn't divide us. But certain differences turn sinister. And that's a process one has to watch out for. It's something that happens within one's own consciousness. And if one can free oneself of that, then that conflict, that division does not arise. Is there conflict between your group and another group? Groups are also innocent groups. A group of workers working together in a hospital or in a school does not create division. But religious groups create division because they are centered on belief and they want to propagate their own belief. They feel that is superior. So that the moment you do that, you create a difference into a division. So again, it is something that happens within our own consciousness. It can be watched, and you can ask the deeper question, why is the consciousness constantly measuring, saying good and bad, and creating division? So if you look at it in all these, there is a common approach. When you are approaching a relationship with an agenda of your own, when you say, I like this, I don't like this, you have a preference, you create conflict, you create division. Instead, if you don't judge, if you don't measure, if you just watch and see a difference as a difference, not demand that the other man must be like you, then there is no ego and therefore no division. So we said in a previous talk that the ego is like a beggar, always asking something for itself in every relationship. And that is self-interest. It destroys love. It brings in possessiveness, jealousy, all the downsides of the ego. So one has to find out if there is an energy which is not from the ego, where one is not seeking anything for oneself, and yet one is enthusiastic, one is energetic. Krishnamurti said, the religious mind is free from self-interest. And when you are free from self-interest, you are acting with love. And when you are in a state of love, he said, do what you will, it will be right. Because the religious definition of right and wrong is not the definition of the businessman or the politician. They decide that that which succeeds is right and that which fails is wrong. The religious right and wrong says, when that action springs from a state of the ego, from self-interest, it's wrong action, even if it succeeds. And when it emanates from a state of love, of non-self, then it is right action, even if it fails. So, whether it is right or wrong, it depends on the state of your mind in which you are performing it. It's not dependent on the results of that action. A totally different approach to life. So one has to find out if it is possible throughout life to act not from self-interest, but from love, and to discover for oneself this energy of love. Because the energy of the ego destroys love. Self-interest is partiality for the first person singular. And you may consider yourself extremely moral and high-principled and so on, and yet you may be quite egoistic. So the dialogue is a means of coming upon wisdom. Wisdom is this understanding of how negative emotions arise within our consciousness. and to free ourselves from that approach, which creates conflict, creates that negative emotion. And that is the religious quest. That is the essence of the religious quest. Not the going to the temple or church and performing the rituals and so on. That's just a social activity. The deeper meaning of a religious mind is the mind that has freed itself from the motivation of self-interest. So friends, tomorrow I'll take up a passage where Krishna ji talked to the trustees of the three foundations and started a dialogue. In that speech, he describes exactly what goes on in our minds, and therefore it is extremely important for us to understand that. And that points out to us the difficulty of this quest. It's not simply a question of a little variation here and there, a little virtue here and there coming in. It's a wholly different way of living. Therefore, I'll end this series of talks with that dialogue tomorrow. And we will try to have a dialogue around that. Now, this is not on a video, unfortunately, but I have the text of it. So I'll share that text on the screen and read it out. And then we can try to have a dialogue in the manner in which I have indicated how a Krishnamurti dialogue should be done. We may not be able to do it, but let us attempt it. Thank you. We can have some questions now.
Thank you, Professor.
Welcome.
We have a question from Dakshinamurti. Dear sir, what is a sacred mind? Is a silent mind a sacred mind, or is there more to it?
You know, we have so many things which we consider to be sacred, which society considers to be sacred, and living in society, we begin to acquire the same feeling that the temple is sacred. For the Hindu, the cow is sacred animal, and so on. That's all sacredness which you are attributing, your thought is attributing to that activity or that. So it's a sentiment, it is not the truth. Unless we can set aside all those notions of what we have been taught is the sacred, you cannot discover what the sacred is, because you will mistake it for a sentiment or a notion which is coming from your past. So unless one is free from the past, you don't have the means to discover the truth being the unknown. You know, Krishnaji has not denied the sacred. He has denied our concepts about the sacred. He has not denied God, but he has denied all our concepts about God. He has said, posit God as the unknown and find out that is the only important thing to do. If you attribute godliness to certain things and you worship them, you're worshipping yourself, your own thoughts. And all churches, all temples, all mosques have been created by human beings through their thought. And so his famous saying is that the temple and the mosque and the church are not religious places because there is no learning taking place there. But a school can be a religious place if it is involved in this kind of learning of what is true and what is false, what we have called self-knowledge. It's not that you are religious only when you have accomplished freedom from the ego or certain virtues and so on. If you approach life without self-interest, you are approaching it religiously. You are approaching it not with the ego, with love. And love is sacred. Love in this way, love where the self is not, is sacred. Nature is sacred because it's not created by man's thinking. But anything that has been put together by thought is not sacred because it's the creation of man, man's thinking.
And now I will read the second part in case it hasn't yet been fully answered. Kay says, a sacred mind can connect with the supremely sacred. What does it mean?
We will know only when we come upon that sacred mind. Right now, we can only speculate about it or make a conjecture, and that has very nominal value. And it has the danger that if we adhere to that opinion, it may take us away from our inquiry into what is sacred. So the important thing is not to answer these questions, but to come upon a state of mind, a wisdom, which will then answer the question.
We have a question from Hareshwar Singh. You briefly discussed personal traits, which to my mind are predominantly shaped by genetic factors. Do they mutually interact with our social conditioning?
Yes, they do, because we all are born with an inner nature which is genetically determined, and it is modified by the nurture. So we are ultimately a product of the nature plus the nurture. and the two interact in our mind. For example, sexuality is part of nature. But how it will express itself in your life is to a large extent conditioned by the way you have grown up in society, whether you will feel guilty about it or you will feel delighted by it and so on. So one has to be aware of both the conditioning as well as the intrinsic nature. In the animal, there is only the intrinsic nature. But in a human being, there is also this whole conditioning which comes from nurture.
The next question is from Stephen. In a K dialogue, how do we balance between knowledge of Krishnamurti's teachings, what he said, and meeting everything from the unknown without any knowledge, including Krishnamurti's teachings?
There is no how in these things. There is no technique or method. If you are very keen and you have seen the danger of the old approach destroying the freshness of your approach, that perception itself will help you. Nobody else, no rule, no method can help you. So that itself is also something one has to learn for oneself through experiment, playing with it in one's life.
And now Kanchan Gogate is asking, is truth a matter of perception?
Yes, as Krishnaji defines truth, and so does the Buddha, truth is only lies at the level of perception, not at the level of ideation. A correct idea is not the truth, not the religious truth. The religious truth is when you perceive what is, namely the fact, without any distortion from your consciousness. Then truth comes into being. And that is an insight. But when your thought colors that insight, then it is not an insight.
We now have a question from Deepika Chatterjee. In spite of my trying my best to act out of love, my neighbor is determined to put me down and finds ways to give me a hard time. How do I continue to remain with love?
It's a test for you. It's like saying in an examination, if a tough question comes, you can treat it as a challenge or you can treat it as a calamity. So it's a challenge. You're facing a difficult situation. It's a challenge. I'm reminded of what the Dalai Lama said to a press reporter. When the press reporter asked him, "Sir, you are the leader of Tibet. Your country has been occupied by the Chinese. Your people are being tortured by them. You have run away from there and taken shelter in a neighboring country. Under these circumstances, how can you be so happy? Because he is happy. And he said, see, there are only two possibilities. Either you can do something about it, then go and do it, or nothing can be done, then that's also all right. To me, that means life doesn't have to come in a way that would be comfortable to me, which I can handle easily and so on. It comes. Sometimes it is difficult, sometimes it is easy. And you have to respond to that life. So that is the answer to your question.
And now Shiva Kumar asks, Sir, did Krishnamurti say not to consider talks before 1933? If so, where did he say that?
He said that to Harsh Tankha, who was a teacher in Brockwood Park, and who was asking him, where should we begin the collected works of Krishnamurti? And he said, start with 1933. Before that, my mind was not completely clear. But later on, he clarified that the mind was clear, but the language was not clear. It was still influenced by theosophical jargon and so on, with which he was brought up. So it took him some time to find a fresh expression instead of using old philosophic terms and theosophical terms.
So now having in mind this recommendation to consider talks after 1933, is this the reason collected works of J.K. start from 1933?
Yes, because Foundation respects the author's rights, and even though some of us don't agree with it, we have no choice in the matter because he is the author of those. And if he wants it that way, then that's the way it should be. There are also other reasons. Rajgopal was editing many of the earlier works, and he was introducing his own passages in place of Krishnaji's, saying that we can express it much more clearly than what Krishnaji did. And so there was all kinds of interpolation. In those days, there was not a tape recorder. So people used to take down lectures by shorthand and then reproduce them. So there were a lot of errors in them. All that may be also a reason why he did not want those things to be published. They had no objection to the Theosophical Society publishing them. But he didn't want the Foundation to publish them because it would create a lot of confusion in the minds of the public. if you publish the book Towards Discipleship, which is the early works of Krishnamurti, when he was in part of the Theosophical Society, it's completely contrary to his later teaching. And people don't always remember that this is early work and it's not the same as the later work. So he said, just don't publish it. That's another reason why he wanted only after 1933.
And Salvador Rojas is asking, is dialogue an expression of meditation?
Yes, if one can do it that way. If one can do it the way Krishna had pointed out, which I talked about, then it is part meditation. It's part of learning process. The dialoguing mind is the learning mind, and the learning mind is the religious mind. Not the mind that has learned, but the mind that is learning. That state of mind is a religious state.
A question from Sanjay. Please elaborate on the meaning of worry versus concern, and also dialogue versus conversation.
Worry has an element of fear in it, so that your mind keeps on going back to the activity and deciding whether you did the right thing and whether something else needs to be done, and so on. So it's the chewing afterwards. Concern is part of love. If your child is ill, you feel concerned. You want to help him. That's part of love. And you get the medicine and you give it to him. But then there is also the fear that if it doesn't act, what will happen and so on. Then that creates worry. So worry is an ego process, is affected by the ego process or by attachment, by fear. But concern is not. Concern is empathy, sympathy, care, which are all part of love.
Now Sam Gezawat is asking, Sir, is it always the right action to turn the other cheek, as Jesus or Buddha suggested, or sometimes we have to slap back?
No formula determines right action. If you are living by a formula, however noble, it's not right action. It's right action when you use your intelligence. But when that intelligence is corrupted by the ego, then it's not right action. But when the intelligence is not corrupted by the ego, when self-interest is not the dominant motivation, then intelligence is the same thing as love and wisdom.
And now the follow-up to this question, how do we know both of these actions, meaning turning the other cheek or slapping back, How do we know both of these actions are not from the ego, nevertheless?
By watching your own consciousness. If it is coming from the ego, there will be hatred associated with it, anger, jealousy, all the consequences of the ego. If those are not there, then it is not from the ego. So you have to be very watchful. Ultimate test is the state of your consciousness, which is perceptible.
A question from Kapil. If I want order in my life, in my daily life, is that ego?
Depends on whether you are approaching it egoistically or you are approaching it with a learning mind. If you are approaching it with a learning mind, then it is not. But if you are approaching it egoistically and suppressing and making a lot of effort through thinking and will and so on, then it is. So the ego comes in one's approach. We have said that a number of times.
And now the second question, how to face fear if we don't have energy to face it?
Find out why you don't have the energy. It may be because you are not taking the right diet. It may be because you are not sleeping properly. It may be because you are too ambitious, too worried about your achievements. There are many causes which make for stress and for difficulties. So you can watch that.
And one more question. To have order in life, body and mind have to be healthy. Is this then from where someone should start?
You can't create order in your mind, but you can get rid of the disorder. Because the disorder always arises from an illusion. Illusion means there is something you are taking to be true, which is not true. It's not part of nature. It has become true for you because you have accepted it. So question it, doubt it, break it, and then the disorder will end. It's only when disorder ends that there is order. If you create order positively, you will end up in the army. That's a very superficial order imposed by fear and compulsion and discipline. And so. That's not order, that is disorder. So you have to define order and disorder not in terms of the external happening, but in terms of the consciousness.
Now we have a statement from Ravi. I am not sure if there is an explicit question. I will read the statement just in case, Professor, you may have a comment. As you said, ego is illusion, but for me, ego, thinker, or self is fact. So opposite is an idea for me. And listening to K brings lots of ideas. Thus, conflict within, as there is no listening, seeing specially. Would you like me to read a couple
No.
this again?
No.
No.
I'm just thinking about it. You see, that's precisely the meaning of illusion. That the mind that is in illusion is not aware that it is an illusion. It takes that to be true, when it is not true. Not true in the sense it may be a construct of human thought which you have accepted, but it's not part of nature. So what is important is to doubt all of these and find out whether they are fact or they are illusion. That is the process of self-knowledge. It's a process by which you end the illusions and bring clarity to the mind.
Next is a question from Narendranath. What is the finer distinction or difference between awareness, consciousness, attention, and mindfulness?
Unlike in science, in these fields, words have not been precisely defined. So different people use these words with somewhat different meaning. And Krishnaji himself uses the same word sometimes with one meaning and another time with another meaning. And he was asked this question. And he said, I will deliberately change my words, because even when you get the correct meaning from the word, it's just an idea, it's not the truth. And what you have to come upon is the truth, which is not in what I'm saying, but behind it. You have to go behind it and discover for yourself what the truth is. That is the teaching. We all often make the mistake of considering what he is saying as the teaching. He has very pointedly said that the entire purpose of what I am saying is to make you realize the need to understand yourself, not the teaching.
We have a question from Prasad now. In some of the social groups that I am part of, I find myself reacting negatively with frustration or anger when I feel the other is acting in a manner to increase conflict. For example, by sharing a fake post that inflames passions and increases division. And now the question, what is a more effective way to respond? Number one, to let my frustration known, or number two, should I first deal with my state of non-love?
What you are noticing is the ignorance in the other person's mind. And the anger that it is evoking in you is part of your ignorance. Because the only way it can go is by helping him to come out of that ignorance. That's precisely what Krishnaji was doing for all 60 years, pointing out the ignorance in our thoughts and leaving it to us to come out of it. But if we judge that, then that judgment is part of our ignorance. That means we think that by hating, that by getting angry, the other man can be changed. This is not true. The other man will change when his ignorance goes away. And For that, you need to befriend him, otherwise he won't listen to you at all, your point of view. So all this reaction is coming from judgment, and one has to beware of that.
And now Mira is asking, when does one stop staying with the question?
When the disorder in your consciousness has ended, then there is no need to watch. And that's perceptible because the disorder causes conflict and pain. And if there is no conflict and no pain, then you know that there is no disorder. Not temporarily, but over a long period of time.
We have next a question from Hareshwar Singh. Were the commentaries on learning in 3 volumes published before 1933? They were all edited by Rajagopal.
No, I think they were produced a little afterwards. I'm not 100% sure. One would have to check the date on the book. Rajagopal kept working for Krishnaji right up to 1945. It didn't end in 1933.
And now question from Deepa. Should we make it a daily practice to have a dialogue with the self, or just when in confusion or distress?
There is no need to make a deliberate practice of it. When you feel like it, you do it. When you don't feel like it, don't do it. That's all. Be easy about it. You can't sort of consciously sit down and do this activity. Otherwise, it will itself become an ego activity. Very subtle. I mean, any other learning also, learning physics or history and so on, you don't do it all the time. When you're interested, you sit down with the book and you learn. In the same way, when you're interested in this, do it.
And a related question, does journaling or meditation help in having a good dialogue with the self?
Depends on what you mean by meditation. If by what society calls meditation is usually some kind of chanting of a word or concentrating on a spot on the wall or etc., where there is a will which is operating. The will is operating, then it's an ego process. And through an ego process, you cannot come upon freedom from the ego. So you have to do it lightly. That's why I said, when you feel like it, you do it because you're interested in doing it. Don't do it like a practice.
Now we have a question from Gause. Sir, from what I observe in the news, India is becoming communally intolerant How are the children of Rajgat Besan school made to understand the whole issue?
We used to have, when I was the principal, from 1986 to 2002, we used to have something called a culture class, in which a teacher would come into the class and raise any question, or a child could raise a question and conduct a dialogue with the student. So it would naturally arise from what is taking place in society. You would ask them, why do you think these Hindus and Muslims are fighting so much? And then go into it with them. So they may agree, they may not agree, but you have started the process of thinking and inquiry in their mind. That's all that you can do. I don't know whether now they still continue this practice of culture class, because it also depends on the capacity of the teacher to do that culture class.
And the next question is from Chamarti Sivarama Raju. How to deal with the rivalry born out of competition?
You know, you can't change the outer world. There are deep-seated reasons why the outer world is the way it is, and you won't be able to change those reasons. But you can watch whether you are contributing to any of those reasons. Are you contributing to religious extremism, to the division of caste, to division between husband and wife, and so on? So if you are not, then your very presence will affect the people around you. That's how Krishna said, that if you are living the teachings, only then the teachings will communicate themselves. Just to communicate the words is a very trivial activity. I remember a question and answer. Once a man in Madras, at the end of Krishna's talk, asked him, "Sir, I'm very enthusiastic about your teaching. I want to spread them. Tell me the best way to do it." And he immediately answered, "Sir, don't try to spread the teaching. You will only spread the word, and the word is not the teaching." What we find easy is usually trivial. There is a saying, a humorous saying in English, that if you're finding that going easy, you are going downhill.
We now have a question from Stephen. David Bohm and others were locked in a room with Kay for several days, and supposedly no one got it or was transformed. Can you talk a little more about that experiment and why it failed?
I think it failed because the barriers are held is very deep in our consciousness. When I say our consciousness, is the consciousness of all human beings. We are attached to our ignorance. We may not know that, but we like our illusions. We feel comforted by them. We even like the ego because it protects you, because it brings you profits and defends you, and so on. So, same instinct which is there in the animal of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain is there within us. Only in our case, it has also become not physical pleasure and physical pain, but also psychological pleasure and psychological pain. And that is the complexity of the human consciousness. Sir, all this is not a simple business. It's much harder to learn all this than it is to do science or mathematics. Because there is a method. You can practice that method. There is no method here. Yet, it's far more necessary to do this because otherwise we are going to destroy ourselves. This is not just my opinion or a pessimistic view. It's what the scientists now are telling, that we are not going to survive this century. And it's we who have brought the world to this danger, not the animals or the plants. They have lived for millions of years without creating danger.
The next question is from Gause. Sir, will the acquiring of knowledge necessarily hinder spiritual inquiry? After all, acquiring of knowledge takes time and consumes psychological energy.
No, knowledge is a different field. It gives you ability, it gives you power, it gives you expression, all of which also you need in your life. But it doesn't necessarily make you a moral person or a religious person. So there's nothing wrong with knowledge. But if you think knowledge will bring wisdom, that's an illusion. So Krishnaji wanted in his schools that there should be an equal emphasis on the learning of knowledge and on self-knowledge. Whereas at present, there is emphasis only on knowledge and no emphasis on self-knowledge. So it produces a lopsided mind in the graduate, extremely capable professionally in a particular direction and extremely ignorant about life. And you can see that. You can see very brilliant scientists and artists and musicians and so on leading a miserable life. They don't have the understanding of life. I told earlier about a question answer between Philosopher Capra and Krishnamurti. He asked him, "Sir, do I have to give up my science in order to do what you are saying?" And he said, "No, sir. But you are first a human being and then a scientist. So learn the art of living, then do your science." That's precisely what we are talking about. And that's what his aim in education was, but he couldn't bring that about. in any of his schools. Because after all, where do the teachers come from? They come from the normal society with normal conditions. And they find it as difficult as we are finding it. And the child meets with the mind of the teacher. He doesn't meet Krishnamurti's mind, even in a Krishnamurti school.
So at this point, we don't have any more questions. We do have a few minutes left. Just wanted to turn it over either to you, Professor, or to any of the organizers to, if you would like to share anything else.
No, tomorrow we'll get into deeper waters because Krishnaji in this dialogue with the trustees, which I am going to present before you, raises very profound questions, and we will take a look at them. Even if we can't resolve them, we can at least become aware of them.
Sorry if I might take a couple of minutes.
Please.
I just wanted to inform all of the people, all the participants here, about our group. We are a dialogue group based here in San Jose, California, and we have been dialoguing for about 12 years. We have approximately 45 members in our group, and if there is any interest from anybody to find out more about our dialogue group, you're more than welcome to write to me. And I will go ahead and post that information in the chat box, either today or tomorrow, and people can make use of that information and come forward and talk to us in any way, shape, or form. That's all I wanted to say, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rao.
We do have a question posted recently. I'm not sure if this was already something from a past day, but I will read it from Chamarti. What it takes to nullify the purpose in relationship?
The awareness that any kind of motive in a friendship destroys the friendship. In a true friendship, there is no motive other than sharing life for the joy of sharing. But when there is a purpose in that friendship, then it is not a true friendship. It's a subtle form of contract that I will be friends with you if you provide me with this, this, and this.
And I believe this may also be a question from Galset. Observation of what purpose is producing in relationship and holding that in attention.
Don't try to change it. Just watch what happens when you approach it with a purpose or a motive. What happens to that relationship? And you will discover for yourself what Krishnaji has pointed out. And you will see that it complicates the friendship and brings in all kinds of negative emotions into it.
Connie Jones is asking a question in preparation of tomorrow's meeting. is the dialogue between Kay and the trustees printed anywhere that we can read and prepare for tomorrow?
No, not in a book, but it was printed for a international trustees meeting, and I took it from there. But I can make it available, but perhaps it will take away the steam from tomorrow's dialogue. So I'll
Okay.
make it available after the dialogue is over.
Thank you.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like now may be a good time to conclude our session today.
Thank you, Casimir.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.